Sugar is an essential staple in our lives and we consume it daily. Today we're talking about long-term food storage, all about sugar. We'll be working with granulated sugar, brown sugar, sugary drinks, honey, powdered sugar. You're going to hear people say that storing sugar is not a priority. And I beg to differ. I know that I find a lot of comfort when I consume sugar. Sugar is very forgiving when it comes to food storage. So there are several ways to do this. You can put it in Mylar bags. You can put it directly into 5-gallon food grade buckets. This is a method I'm going to use today, is putting my sugar into glass jars. A few things you need to know when you are doing this method is that light is one of the things that can be damaging to food storage. So you need to make sure that you are storing this in a cool place in your home that is also dark. You can either cover this or you can put it, let's say, in a closet somewhere where there's not going to be a lot of light hitting this. It's hard because everything I've seen online shows people displaying their food storage on these shelves that line rooms. As beautiful as that is, you should not be exposing your food storage to light. Another thing you should know when it comes to storing sugar is not to use an oxygen absorber. I know in a previous video we were storing beans and rice long term and we used oxygen absorbers in those situations. When it comes to sugar, if you use an oxygen absorber, you will end up with a brick of sugar. It doesn't mean the sugar has gone bad. You can still eat it. It's just going to be a lot more work having to chisel away at that block of sugar. It will no longer be pourable. Sugar is one of those items that can be stored indefinitely if stored properly. Sugar does not support microbial growth and therefore it has an unlimited shelf life. For all different types of sugar, an airtight container is all you need. I'm going to be using canning jars. This is a quart canning jar and this is a pint, and you can see the difference here. It's going to be easier for me to use a quart size because I still have to find somewhere to store these in my house. And if I have too many of these, it's going to become a space issue for me. Ooh, sugar is a little bit messy, so be prepared. And this is what you're seeing here. I have sugar just on the outside of this packaging that is just falling onto my counter. This is the main reason why we move our sugar from the bag into something that is airtight, because with this sugar just lurking around here in the seal, that's going to attract ants and other insects. A quick update on what I'm seeing right now. I went to Costco last week and Costco was out of long grain rice. They were completely out of oats. I went to Sam's Club a couple days later to find those items, and at Sam's Club it really surprised me, but I found sugar there. But the sugar was as hard as a brick. Every single bag of sugar that I saw, I would pick it up and kind of knock on it, and there was no, like with this sugar, I could squeeze it. It's pourable. And it really got me thinking, what happened to those pallets of sugar that were sitting out? And what's happening is the items that we're seeing on shelves today have likely been sitting on storage containers for over a year waiting to be unloaded. We all know that with the pandemic, it messed up the processing of items coming into the country, and it was very difficult to get those shipping containers inventoried and emptied. We're starting to see that now, at least in the stores near me. The sugar was as hard as a rock, and so was baking soda. We were able to find a few bags of sugar in the very back after we moved some of the bricks around a little bit. It does surprise me that they were still selling the bags of sugar in that condition where they were hard as a rock. If your white sugar does harden, it's okay. There's a way to make it pourable again. Get a baking sheet and line it with parchment paper. Put the sugar on the parchment paper. You're going to bake that at 390 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes. Then you're going to turn the oven off and let the baking sheet sit in the oven for another hour. At that point, you'll be able to use a fork and loosen the granules making your sugar as good as new. So here's what we're gonna do. We are going to pour our sugar directly into the glass jar. When you get the sugar to the top, I'm gonna remove my funnel and just give it a little tap down, and that's gonna give me a little bit more room to add more. I would do about 1/2 inch of headspace, because what I'm going to do next is I'm going to vacuum seal this jar. So I have my sugar. You will see that you are not supposed to reuse the lids if it's already been sealed on something else. A little trick you can do is boil those lids. The reason why they tell you not to reuse them is when you have it sealed already on something and then remove it, there's an indentation on this outer rim here on the little rubber part. So what you do is boil it for about 20 minutes, and that gets this to lose that indentation so that you can reuse it again. I'm going to be using my food saver for this. On the side here is my accessory control. Normally it looks like this. And this is the part that I can push up against a food saver bag, and then it will vacuum seal at that point. So I remove that bottom portion. And the kit that I found on how to vacuum seal jars came with this cord here. And I tried for a few minutes to try to get these two pieces to connect before I realized this is not necessary for the type of food saver that I have. So I'm going to just put this away. And then it also came with a wide mouth lid and a regular mouth lid. When I buy my canning jars, I try to only buy regular mouth size. That way, no matter what size I'm working with, whether it's a pint or a quart or a gallon, I can use my lids interchangeably between all of them. If I had some that were in wide mouth only, I would have to buy double the supplies, and I just try to keep it very simple. And we're going to put that into the hole on top of this. And you just stick that right on top. I have my jar here with the lid on. What you want to make sure you do is make sure this rim on top of the jar doesn't have any sugar from the pouring. We did use a funnel, and so that helps to keep things pretty clean. I'm going to put this and push straight down until you can feel it kind of almost click into place. We're going to turn the power on. And at the top over here, I have a little button that says vacuum. We'll push that. The way you get this off is you pull directly up on the accessory attachment, and then to remove this, you want to be careful to not lift the lid of the jar that we just sealed on. So I'm going to kind of go at an angle and just do a little bit of wiggling up, and there is this rubber seal that goes inside of here. It sometimes comes off when you're doing this process. So we're just going to push that right back in, no big deal. If you want to test and see if it is truly sealed, you lift from that lid. That is an airtight seal. Is this step necessary when canning sugar in canning jars? It is not. Because I have the food saver and I have the attachment to be able to vacuum seal these jars, I'm going to go ahead and do it. When it comes to long-term food storage, if you've got the supplies, use it. You want to make sure that this is going to last as long as possible. When you're pouring your sugar into your jars, make sure that you leave a little space at the top so that your sugar can still move around. That way you can check it and make sure that it's not clumping as the years go on. I know that when storing sugar, you should not put it next to another item that has a smell, because the sugar will absorb that smell. I'm also going to do 1 or 2 5-gallon food grade buckets. I don't have 5-gallon Mylar bags, so I'm going to pour directly into the bucket and then seal that up. That's going to protect it from any pests that might try to get into it. It's also going to eliminate the light exposure factor that I get when I'm using canning jars. Another thing to think about is, do you live in an area where there are earthquakes? Because if you do, storing in glass bottles is probably not going to be a good idea for you. So you want to go ahead and move right into those 5-gallon buckets. To use Mylar or not to use Mylar, totally up to you. A friend of mine said that she pours her sugar directly into 5-gallon buckets, and the longest that she's had one was for 8 years. And at the 8-year mark, she tasted it, and she said it did taste a little bit different. Maybe it absorbed some of the other smells that were in the pantry that it was stored in, who knows? But she said that when she baked with it, that went away. The next sugar that we're gonna work with is brown sugar. Again, you have the option of storing this in Mylar bags. You can also freeze brown sugar, and I know people that have done that. And the freezing process is really only to prevent any insects from getting into it. If you have the freezer space, then absolutely that can be an option for you. I don't have that kind of freezer space, so I'm going to store my brown sugar in a quart-sized canning jar. Here's a fun fact about brown sugar. It is actually just granulated sugar with molasses mixed into it, so it is something that you can make at home. When it comes to emergency preparedness, there are a lot of people who don't store brown sugar in big quantities because it doesn't have an indefinite shelf life like granulated sugar does. So what they do is they store more granulated sugar, and then they get themselves a few containers of molasses. But from what I can tell, it sounds like the sugar will clump regardless. So remember, how do we soften up brown sugar? You put in a slice of bread. It's that easy. Try mixing 1 tablespoon of molasses to 1 cup of sugar when you're making brown sugar. Remove this top, just do a little wiggle, and every time I do it, my rubber seal keeps popping off, so there we go. You're gonna do, oh, look at that. That came off, it did not seal. I'm gonna try that again. So make sure that there's no sugar around here, nothing on this. Push it all the way on again, make sure we get a firm seal there, and oh, look at that. Now we have a proper seal. As far as brown sugar goes, if you store it in this bag, it looks like it is best by May of 23. So we are in June of 22 right now. So in the original container it comes in, it only stores for 1 year, just over a year. Transferring that sugar into a glass container and vacuum sealing will increase the life of the brown sugar. Now, if it's past 2 years and I haven't used this, I'm gonna do some critical thinking. I'm gonna open it up, I'm gonna smell it, I'm going to give a little taste, and then I'm gonna bake with it. Remember, when it comes to sugars in general, but specifically to brown sugar, because this does contain moisture, do not use an oxygen absorber because you could create a botulism issue. No oxygen absorbers. And just as a reminder, when you're buying your brown sugar in 2-pound bags or your powdered sugar in your 2-pound bags, you can leave them in those bags and put them directly into an airtight container, and that will also keep it fresh. Since this video is all about sugars, we would be amiss if we didn't go over the storage of honey. Honey can last indefinitely. They have found it in pyramid tombs, and it was still edible. A friend of mine gave me advice, and she said the honey bears from Costco, after years of storing these, they are still pourable. Whereas she had bought another honey bear from the grocery store, and it crystallized up on her pretty quick. As far as the honey goes, I'm okay just storing these in a cool, dark place and leaving it just like that. I'm not gonna put them in bins. I will just put them on shelves. And I did purchase this jar of honey a couple of years ago, and you can see at the top of it, it has started to crystallize. That does not mean that it has gone bad. That just means that I need to warm this up. You can place this glass jar in warm water until the crystals fall back into it, and then it becomes pourable again. So do not throw away honey. You can also decant honey into smaller jars. Honey lasts forever, and it retains all of its nutritional qualities. Let's talk about sugary powdered drinks. Now, these aren't things that we drink as a family, but it's something that I did get for our food storage for a couple of reasons. Number one, there are electrolytes in here, and so if we ever needed more electrolytes, we can make it from this powder. But the main reason for me is that in an emergency situation, we might be using water that we need to purify. Now, that means it's going to have a weird taste. And so I want to mask that. As soon as I know that the water is drinkable, then that's when you can start to add things like this to flavor that water to make it more palatable. By doing the glass jar method, I'm going to increase its shelf life from 1 year to at least 2 years. And at that point, when I open it, I'm going to, again, critical thinking, look at it, make sure it looks good, there's no pests or anything in it. I'm going to taste it, and then I'm going to drink it. I'm going to put 2 dates on my jars. One date is going to be my bottling date, and then I'm going to put an estimated expiration date that is good until 23. I'm going to add an extra year because I think that putting it in the glass jars and putting it under the best circumstances, I can extend the life of this product by an extra year. And once again, when I go to open it, I'm going to be observing and looking and making sure that everything looks good. One of the best things you can do to stay organized with your food storage is make a chart. I will write down Gatorade. 6 months prior to the expiration date, I'm going to look for opportunities in our lives where we can use this. Whether we're going out to the lake and we'll be on the boat for a little bit, I can make a huge jug of it. If we're going to a sporting game, then anything you can do to track the dates so that as you're approaching the due dates, you're not going to let it expire and spoil. To keep moisture away from these containers and away from the product, this is going to be a little bit more powdery than the other items that we've worked with. So I'm going to kind of stand back so I'm not sniffing sugar here. You can see that cloud. Now I'm going to have to be really careful to make sure that this rim is clear before I put my lid on it because it was very powdery. We want to make sure that we get a good seal and clean that off. Next up, we're working with lemonade. If you wanted, you could maybe put a little label on here that tells you the quantities on how much of this to add to the water, but I like to do it to taste, so I'll just keep pouring and mixing and tasting until it tastes right to me, so I'm not even going to include any quantities. If you do not have a food saver, you can use an automotive brake bleeder to do the same thing. You'll just have to pump it by hand. Let's talk briefly about powdered sugar. I don't have my package in front of me. I need to go out and grab it so I can jar it, but it's the same as the rest of the process. You can either use a Mylar bag or you can put it into your canning jars. In case you didn't know, powdered sugar is just granulated sugar that's been blended up. You add a little bit of cornstarch to that blend, and that's how you get powdered sugar. So it's the same idea with the brown sugar for those who are doing long-term food storage. Most of us prefer to store more sugar as opposed to trying to store more powdered sugar because it does not have an indefinite shelf life. If I wanted to do powdered sugar, I can just throw the bags directly from the store into the freezer. And once again, that's not extending its shelf life at all. It's just keeping out insects and keeping it safe. If you have the freezer space for that, then great, do it that way. There's not a lot of revolutionary information here when it comes to storing all the different types of sugars. I wanted to put this video together so that you don't feel overwhelmed. And so you have a good guide on these are your options on how to do it and the reasons why we don't do certain things. One of the things I wanted to show you is if you're having an issue using your food saver accessory to seal this because the powder is getting in the way and clogging it at all, here's a trick you can do. So these do come with 1 scoop, and some people like to just drop the scoop inside the jar. This is pretty worthless to me. I won't be doing that because, like I said, I like to mix to taste. If you find your food saver struggling to get a seal because the powder is kind of all over as it's sucking out the air, I've heard people do this with cupcake holders, but these are just regular coffee filters, and you can just cut up a piece that you can place over the top. This is gonna go inside of your container, and then you push your ends down to block off the powder. This is only if your food saver is struggling to seal. Mine has been fine. I haven't had to use this trick at all, but I did read that and I thought it would be worth passing on. So you make sure no sugar on your rim. Put your lid on. Let's see if there's a difference. Okay, it is done. We'll wiggle this off gently. There we go. And ta-da! First try. Our powder drink is sealed. Remember, keep this in a cool, dry, dark place, and it's going to extend your shelf life. I'm going to write an extra year than what was on this container, and then I'm going to play it by year, and I will every few months taste it and check it and make sure everything still looks good until it's all gone. When you go to look for answers for storing things like sugar long term, sometimes there's not going to be an answer because there hasn't been enough research, which is why I'm giving you the information so that you can apply it to your life and apply it to the different factors that you're working with. Like I said before, if you live in a high humidity environment, you're going to be doing things to bring down that humidity to preserve your food. If you live in an area with a lot of heat, I'm going to take extra precautions to make sure that that food is stored in an area of the house that does not get that hot. If you live in a high humidity area, I would not recommend storing sugar in tin cans. Remember that metal rusts and sugar can corrode metal. Know your risk factors and do everything you can to eliminate them. This is The Sensory Life.